ISO 14001. Okay, so I'll talk about ISO 14001 in terms of what it is and then why it has become so popular in China and elsewhere. Okay, this is the basic idea is related to this so-called Deming cycle, plan, do, check, adjust, where you make a plan for your environmental management. That means you have to have a policy, you have to have responsibilities assigned to workers, you have to have a training program and so on. You have to have specific goals. You may not be in compliance with standards, but you have to have a goal that says we have a plan for becoming into compliance. And then you have to check on your performance by monitoring, getting reports from all the units to see who's doing what, are they doing their job, is the training proper, and so on, and then making adjustments and cycling through. So the idea is continuous, you know, having this as a continuous cycle within the firm. And so you set up a management system within the firm. It's called an environmental management system because the whole story is about environment. I mean, it's how to meet the environmental targets. And of course, management buy-in and follow-up is the key. That's this other part down here. If you don't have the management involved, then it's just window dressing. I mean, you have to, because you need resources to make improvements. And you need top-level commitment to make those commitments of resources that you need. For a long time, the big auto companies in the US requiring all suppliers, their manufacturing sites to be in compliance with ISO. ISO 14001, okay, let me go back. So you set up an environmental management system, but it's not necessarily certified. So you have to go to an official body that is qualified to do the certification of your system. So you set up an environmental management system, and then you have to go to a third party to be audited. The third party itself has to be officially recognized, but then you're audited. And then if you're audited and you pass the test and so on, you get ISO certified. Okay, so that's the idea of saying you're ISO certified, yeah.
It's more the process than the results.
I wouldn't go there entirely. The results, I mean, in other words, if you're doing, you set up a system, you're monitoring, you have records. I mean, this thing is a record-keeping nightmare. There's a lot of record-keeping that's involved, and so on. And so when the auditor comes, the auditor wants to see what you did in relationship to your planned goals. Now, it turns out that if you're going backwards, you're going to have trouble, you know, getting recertified. If you're going forward and you had some problems that are explainable, well, maybe you'll get certified. But you have to make adjustments to say, well, how are you going to go forward so that you'll eventually hit this target? Yeah. So a lot of people complain about ISO and say, well, it's just window dressing. And I'm sure with any system you set up, the system could be corrupted. So who knows, in some places with some official auditors that there's corruption, could be. But the idea is that you don't have to be in compliance, but you have to be making progress towards compliance to be certified. And so you find more and more companies that are asking for certifications. And the reason you want to do this if you're a multinational is because if you know that the company is certified and it's officially certified, then at least you can say when you're attacked by the NGOs, well, my first tier, I only work with ISO certified companies, you see. I mean, in other words, it's kind of a defensive strategy for a company, like a big multinational. And as a consequence of that, it is becoming more and more applied as a kind of de facto standard. That if you want to sell to these big companies, then you're going to have to do it. So these are just some examples. And look at the growth in the number of certifications. The certification, by the way, the ISO system, ISO is based in Geneva. Okay, it used to be thought of as the International Standards Organization. ISO was ISO for that, but they changed it because of the French. Because ISO, in the French acronym for International Standards Organization, is not that. I forget what it is, but maybe it's OSI or something like that. But it's not ISO. It's not correct. In any case, so in Geneva they said, well, this is not an acronym for anything. We're just ISO. That's our name, ISO. In any case, look at this steep steep slope here on the number of new certifications. Now we come back to China. These are in thousands. So China has 70,000 companies certified, and Japan is second with 35, and then it trails off pretty dramatically. Spain 18, and so on.
The U.S., you know it?
U.S. is well off the charts, below, way below, yeah. Yeah. I come here with a visa, but I'm not an ambassador. I don't come to defend the United States. I come as a guest, but not as a defender of my country. Believe me, I don't want to have that job. Yeah. Yeah, but...
Do you think that the number is the result of what you said about the pressure that, for instance, the importing companies in Europe and America?
There's no question about it. There's no question. There's no question. And the reason is that the Chinese central government has facilitated the process of getting these certifications by setting up these auditing bodies and so on, providing training for Chinese companies on how to set these up. Because they know, but they're big exporters. And so to be effective as exporters, they're going to have to deal with this de facto requirement, and so they're gearing up. This is part of it's part of the deliberate strategy on the part of the government to spread the word among the companies. You see, the problem for Pakistan is Pakistan doesn't have a government that's spreading the word or capable of spreading the word. I mean, they can't even manage their environmental regulations. Yes, sir?
One question. How can you compare all this number of certified organizations to the total number of organizations?
Oh, yeah, well, this is going to be a small fraction of the total number of organizations in China. Yeah, that's a good point.
Does the rank will change?
Oh, if you did it per, yes, it would change. I don't have those numbers, but it would change. It probably would be. But, you know, I work with tabulated data for this. You know, it's one slide out of many. Yeah. But, I mean, it's still impressive because of the infrastructure that the Chinese have set up. Believe me, you know, the U.S. has a lot of firms. A very small number of... it's because the government has made it a program. That's why you see the numbers moving in certain directions. Plus, they're big exporters. You know. Yeah, well, there was a question right here. Yeah.
But isn't that right that many USA companies prefer to build their polluting factories somewhere like in China or somewhere like...
Well, they could prefer... I don't say it's a deliberate... Well, first of all, our government has no real policy on the subject. Now, in terms of companies preferring, we can talk about that. Let's do that. Okay, there's this theory of the pollution havens that says, you know, the countries from the big companies from Europe and North America, let's say Canada and the U.S., they want to outsource their pollution, and that's the reason they're going to China. There's no evidence for that. The reason they're going to China is because of low, or other countries like Thailand, is because of low labor cost.
Yeah.
You know. Now, it's a side effect. It's a side effect that they're exporting the pollution. But it's not the pollution haven idea, because that's been studied by econometricians, because everybody thought for sure this was going to be the case, that this is the reason that companies go there. But the fraction of the total cost that's related to environmental cleanup is much lower than the labor costs. So labor cost drives the process. So, you know, I mean, but it is a theory. And, you know, it's probably arguable. I mean, certainly anecdotally, I'm sure you can find stories that said this company went there because they didn't want to deal with the pollution. But there's no statistical evidence. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Would be that civilized countries of the West, the US and the Europe, actually bought quotas, the pollution quotas from like African countries and pollution quotas from Asian countries who do not have any production in exchange for money, so they could actually, their country is situated in the states could actually have more pollution from that land.
All right.
I mean,
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting... No, I know that particular argument as well. All right, so let's talk about that for a moment. Pollution has a lot of different ingredients, okay? And the carbon or the greenhouse gases, these are latecomers in the pollution business. Carbon dioxide was only recently declared by the US Environmental Protection Agency as a pollutant. There are lots of other nasty things going on. So this particular story is related to carbon and greenhouse gases and global warming. And yes, you could say that the companies in North America and Europe want to be able to buy these emission reduction credits that are coming under the Kyoto Protocol from these developing countries because it's much cheaper. The marginal cost to reduce carbon emissions is much lower in developing country like China, although China's now, you know, pretty soon is not going to be developing anymore because it'll be in a different rank. But the point is they want to do that because it's cheaper there. And then this eventually will restrict the growth of those countries because when it's time for them to cut their, you know, they join Kyoto or some Kyoto equivalent, it's going to be harder for them. You can make that argument, and it's certainly true. And you know what? It's an ethical question, isn't it? It's an ethical question. But in the United States, we haven't faced the ethical question because we haven't even faced the practical question of whether we should control carbon. So you can't make the argument about the United States because we don't even have a requirement. You see. And I don't think the Europeans did it for that reason, although European companies, of course, did lobby to have that because they want to be able to get a certain fraction. So, but there are so many problems. I view that as kind of an experiment. Yeah?
Yeah, but the question we've been recently discussing is not about the actual amount of different types of the pollution in different countries, but for the measures taken to put them down. Like one of them is so
14,000, yeah.
The question is why we don't see some big well-developed countries in this chart. Is that probably because they mostly supply themselves with many products, and they don't ask such certification from the domestic manufacturers like USA, for example. But they do have suspicion for Chinese companies. They do want them to comply to.
Well, yeah, but the thing is that most of the, you know, many of the suppliers are coming from outside. This is the, you know, I mean, it's not like a trivial fraction. Now, I mean, these are good, you know, if we were all together for 6 months in a course, we could make some projects to actually try to get data to, you know, investigate some of these questions. They're good questions. But I don't, no, I think in the case of the U.S., I don't, you know, we just, you know, why did these developing countries, why are they doing so much ISO? Is because they're suppliers. I mean, the key thing is if you're a supplier, get with the program, otherwise you're going to be in trouble. And that's what they recognize. And some of them, they do it for branding. You know, they say, well, I'll be ISO certified because, you know, we're branded. But if you look at Ford Motor Company, there are plenty of small firms in the U.S. that supply Ford Motor Company. They have to be ISO. You see, it's just not that many. You see. These are good questions. These are good questions. Was there another question? Should we push ahead?